So I hope you can tell by the look on my face right now that I'm in a much better mood here on this Tuesday than I was on Monday. Just like Kirby Smart said during his weekly press conference yesterday, they have moved on, turned the page from Auburn. We have here on DawgNation Daily as well. Now, the game will come up today in at least one sense. I'll tell you about that. Maybe even more than one way, but we'll do that over the course of the program. But the tone of today's show very much different. No more wallowing in the self-pity of the Auburn loss. It's all about looking ahead to how Georgia gets better and moves on, including a big home game against Kentucky on Saturday. Jeff Sintel here as well. We'll talk to him about Caleb Tanner's decommitment. It's all on the way next as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is big news around DawgNation today. It involves a decommitment from the class of 2018. That is Caleb Tanner, the four-star defensive end. I've obviously got things I could say about that, opinions that I could share, but it's really Jeff Sintel you want to hear on this, so I'll kind of save my thoughts on Tanner until Jeff joins us here. Coming up about 15 minutes from right now into our broadcast, we'll have Jeff Sintel to talk about all the stuff with UGA recruiting. That's going to be a fun conversation today. Before we get to that, I was telling the video audience a moment ago, turn the page here. No more bad mood for us. No more negativity. No more wallowing in self-pity after the Auburn loss. It's all about looking ahead at Kentucky the rest of the season. I think Georgia's still got a lot to play for, and I think that Saturday, final home game, is going to be a really big day for the Dogs, and that's actually where I want to start our show here today because I thought that Kirby Smart, when he spoke to the media yesterday, gave the fans a bit of a challenge, and this is something that I kind of already had on my mind. I mentioned this at the end of our Dixie Vodka postgame show on Saturday night from Auburn, that my hope was that fans would be able to shake off the Auburn loss and look ahead to the upcoming Saturday in Sanford Stadium against Kentucky for a lot of reasons, the main one being this is the final home game for a group of Georgia seniors who have really matter to this program. Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, Davin Bellamy, Lorenzo Carter. Those are the four big names that you mentioned, but you could go on and on with names after that. These are significant guys, not just for this year's team in terms of their leadership, but in terms of pivotal figures in the recent history of the Georgia program. And when Kirby Smart met with the media yesterday, he used the mouthpiece provided to him by the media to send a direct challenge to UGA fans, people like you and me. And here's what Kirby Smart wants all of DawgNation to know but the final home game against Kentucky on Saturday.
It's the last home game for a group of guys who've been really special to me, but they've been really special to this DawgNation, the legacy they leave behind, and a lot of them, had opportunities to come out, and it'll be their last chance. So really want to challenge our fan base to come out and support these guys to end it right at home. Got an opportunity to do some things some teams have not done around here before, and they can do that by finishing it right Saturday.
And that's a challenge that I hope that DawgNation absolutely accepts. And we know, those of us who go to the games, we know the difference here. There are some games that just sort of feel a little different than others, and you can tell early on how early the students start to fill the place in, how early the alumni and the older folks who go to the games, how early they start to leave their tailgates to make their way into Sanford Stadium. You sort of know an electric atmosphere when you feel it. And Georgia's been lucky enough to have a lot of those this season because Georgia's been so good. And last home game was the number one team in the country, and there was some extra juice in the game because of that. And, maybe coming off a loss this, past Saturday, maybe there's a reason to think that the game against Kentucky would be a little less so. Maybe it's a little cold on Saturday. I haven't seen the forecast. I really don't know what the weather has in store. But what I hope is that DawgNation sort of takes advantage of this opportunity to come out one more time. You only get like 6 of these a year to kind of show up in Athens on a game day, fill a stadium, and have a good time with, as the song says, 92,000 of your closest friends. I mean, this is an opportunity to do that this weekend, and it is for a good cause to honor some guys who have meant so much to Georgia. But I think this is also true even for the folks who won't be going to the game, because a lot of you live a long way away. A lot of you enjoy watching the game on television more so than you enjoy watching it in person. So even if you're not going to the game, I still think there is something that you take from what Kirby Smart has to say here, that it's an opportunity. They're not going to hear you cheering. They're not going to see you in your living room, but it is an opportunity for you to just sort of soak it in. These guys in a moment that's very special to them. These guys, between the hedges for their last time. And, I think that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we'll look back on these players, especially Chubb and Michel and Lorenzo Carter and guys like that, as guys who I think laid a bit of a foundation for the Georgia program. And whatever success Georgia, celebrates in the future. It may be national championships, could be won this year, but it may be national championships in the future. I mean, I think we'll look back on this second team for Kirby Smart and these guys who chose to stick around for one more time as a big reason why that was made possible. So even if you're not going to the game, I think you have an obligation or an opportunity here to appreciate these players for what they've meant in a moment that's going to be really special for them. In fact, Kirby Smart talked a little bit more about these guys, their value to Georgia, and what Saturday is going to be like for them. Here's Kirby Smart.
Yeah, I think it's a special group. I think it's a special group because they've got really good leadership. They've got an opportunity to win what may be their 38th, possibly 39th win of their careers, which could rank them right in the top 10 senior classes to ever play here if they can pull that off. So big thing for me is that everybody else on the team acknowledges that it's their last home game, and you prepare and play as if it was yours. Because I know what that last home game means in Sanford Stadium. It's the one you remember the most, and these guys have meant a lot to this program. Meant a lot to me personally. They meant a lot to the staff, but they've meant a lot to this university. And I think we all owe it to them as a fan base, as coaching staff, as a team, to make sure that we give them our best effort.
Boy, don't you love that line there at the end? We owe it all as a fan base to make sure that we give them our very best effort. And frankly, I don't want to, over-dramatize this or exaggerate it too much, but I think that Kirby Smart's absolutely right about that. And to go back to something we talked about on yesterday's show, coming off the loss to Auburn, there was this sort of glass half empty, glass half full debate going on between DawgNation. Some folks kind of pointing out all the flaws of the Auburn game and saying, this team is doomed to fail at the end of the season. Other folks kind of looking at it more positive outlook of one regular season loss, not gonna hurt you. This team's still got all of its goals and objectives out in front of it. Well, the best way to indicate to the team how true that is to treat Saturday like a big day inside Sanford Stadium. Now, the East has already been wrapped up. Georgia already owns the East here for 2017. The Kentucky game, inconsequential in that regard, but it's still an opportunity for the Georgia fans to give the sort of emotional reboot the team and coaches might need coming off the loss to Auburn on Saturday. And despite the fact that the East is already wrapped up, there are a few other goals that this Georgia team apparently has in mind and in store for itself that haven't quite been accomplished yet, and at least a couple of those might be able to be accomplished on Saturday. Here's a little more from Kirby Smart to explain that very point.
It is important to the senior class that they finish it off the right way. They want to be one of the first teams to win the SEC East and beat everybody on the East. That's a first for them. Chance to go undefeated at home, which hadn't happened since 2012 or 2011. They want to be able to do those things and earmark, especially after last year's home schedule. That's important to them. I wouldn't say it was a written down goal of any kind, but it's important to the senior class we do it the right way.
And listen, I think that referencing last year there is absolutely appropriate by Kirby Smart because a lot of us lived through those disappointing home games, struggling against Nichols, Hail Mary against Tennessee, lost to Georgia Tech, lost to Vanderbilt. It was a miserable, miserable home performance by Georgia last season. I know these guys who play and coach with a lot of pride want to correct that this year. So thus far in 2017, they've done exactly that. And I know they're looking to put a punctuation mark on it Saturday. I hope that fans, do the same thing. I think it needs to be a great atmosphere to celebrate guys who've been great for the University of Georgia and to indicate to this team and the rest of the country that DawgNation believes there is still plenty of good football left to come for Georgia in 2017. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are glad to have you with us. A lot of ways you can access our program. You can watch us on video, of course, 10 a.m. every Monday through Friday on the DawgNation Facebook page. If you're in the Athens area, you can listen to us on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref and in podcast form wherever podcasts are found, iTunes, SoundCloud. We'll post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just glad you have found us here today on DawgNation Daily, however you've gotten to the program. And we'd love for you to join us tomorrow night as I record this on a Tuesday. We're just about a day away from our big Own the East celebration taking place tomorrow at the Kroger Marketplace, Lindbergh. We'll throw the address on the screen so you can see that. And if you're listening to us right now, I'll give it to you. It's 2452 Morosco Way, northeast in Atlanta. That's the Kroger Marketplace, Lindbergh. Once again, 2452 Morosco Way, northeast in Atlanta. We're there tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. And here's how it's going to work. For those of you who've never been to one of our live events before, Jeff Sintel and I will typically do like a off-air Q&A. Jeff will give you a lot of sort of behind-the-scenes details about UGA recruiting. That part's always really fun. We'll kind of talk about the path to the playoff that's left for the Georgia Bulldogs. We'll do that. And then we'll do a Facebook Live broadcast as well. It'll be a lot of fun looking ahead to the Kentucky game, looking ahead to Georgia Tech, the SEC Championship, kind of doing all that. And, oh, yeah, by the way, while supplies last, we're also going to have some Own the East T-shirts to give away. So that's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow. Kroger Marketplace in Lindbergh. It's the place where we did our Own the East preview back to start the season, and we'll finish it off in terms of celebrating that goal being accomplished with our Own the East celebration tomorrow night, Kroger Marketplace there in Lindbergh from 6 to 8 p.m. Speaking of the Own the East T-shirts, I'm giving one of those away while supplies last each and every day here on DawgNation Daily. The way that you get one is by simply retweeting a tweet from me at DawgNation Daily. I will put up a tweet in the morning previewing our video show and then a link to our audio show after 12 o'clock p.m. or so with a link to the audio version of our show. And then anyone who retweets that tweet, I will draw a winner per day from that group of retweets each and every day. So if you'd like to participate in our Own the East drawing, love to have you do that. Just go to @DawgNation Daily on Twitter and retweet either the video link or the audio link that I send out each day from my Twitter account. And let me also send out some congratulations to yesterday's winner. Congratulations to Kelly Estep. And Kelly, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, but Kelly Estep, a winner here today of our Own the East T-shirt, and we'll do one of those again today. So make sure you retweet that from me at DawgNation Daily on Twitter. All right, as I said a moment ago, we'll have Jeff Sintel here on the program in just a little bit. Caleb Tanner does decommit from Georgia. Trey Hill says some kind of weird things about the Auburn victory over UGA. What does all that mean for the class of 2018? We'll talk to Jeff about that in just a moment. Before that, though, to briefly go back to the past and the Auburn game, I thought that Kirby Smart said something interesting yesterday. And I don't have video proof of this, but you're just going to have to kind of hear me out on this. I think that Kirby Smart was maybe more bothered by something than he sort of let on yesterday, or at least more aware of something than he might have let on. Let me lead you into this. At the very end of yesterday's show, we talked a little bit about Gus Malzahn, the Auburn coach, who, not knowing he was being recorded, not knowing that he was on video or audio, after he finished up his CBS interview with Allie LaForce on Saturday night, to someone standing near, well, he wanted to be known that he thought his team had beaten the canine excrement out of Georgia on Saturday. And in fact, let me give you some audio proof of exactly just how proud Gus Malzahn was of himself and his team on Saturday night. Here's what he said on the field directly after the game.
We whipped the dog crap out of this.
So that's Malzahn after the game saying we whipped he says dog crap. I don't know, he's like a 9-year-old boy or what, but that's what he says after the game about what Auburn had done to Georgia. Now, it's probably not a surprise to you that Kirby Smart was asked about this in his weekly press conference on Monday. And the answer here, I think, sort of belies the actual intent of Kirby Smart. You know, I'm watching this on GeorgiaDawgs.com. If you go to GeorgiaDawgs.com, you can see the full press conference. And when Kirby Smart's asked, hey, did you hear that Gus Malzahn, what he said about you, your team, immediately after the game? Kirby has a little bit of a smirk on his face. He has a little bit of a smile on his face. He didn't look shocked, surprised, didn't look like he didn't expect the question. He was very apparently aware of what had been said by Gus Malzahn, and here's the answer that Kirby Smart gave.
I'll be honest with you. I think when you perform the way they did on the field, you earn the right to say really whatever you want. So I don't get into what Gus says, and he probably doesn't get into what I say.
So that's what a coach, I think, is supposed to say in that sense. But if you see the body language of the press conference, as I said, the official site, GeorgiaDawgs.com, has got the video. You can watch Kirby Smart's reaction to the question. This was not a question that he didn't expect. And, you know, for instance, he was also asked about wearing black jerseys on Saturday. And I guess we can talk about that for a minute if you want to. But the body language when he was asked about black jerseys, it almost seemed like he was surprised to get that question. He was kind of caught off guard by that and didn't really have a well-thought-out answer for that necessarily because he didn't, I guess, expect to be asked that question. At least that's what his body language indicated. That's not what you got from him on the Gus Malzahn question. There was the slightest faint hint of a smirk, the slightest faint recognition that, yeah, he knew this might be coming, which leads me to believe that if he was aware of it, that means that some of the other Georgia coaches were aware of it. And if the other Georgia coaches were made aware of it, well, that means they're probably doing their part to make the Georgia players aware of it. And listen, Kirby Smart on face value is absolutely right here. There is not a whole lot you can say to the guy who just won the game. It's sort of his choice about how much you want to boast, how much you want to brag, how much you want to say about all that. And apparently Gus Malzahn chose to do some boasting and bragging on Saturday. But as the old saying goes, to the victor goes the spoils. If you're a Georgia fan here, the only thing that you can hope for is the opportunity to get a little revenge, the opportunity to make Gus Malzahn regret what he said, either this year because Auburn earned its way in the SEC championship game, or keeping this in mind for another 365 days and feeding this back to him next November when these two teams get together. But it's kind of funny how the landscape for this SEC championship game has changed. I mean, you have spent most of this season saying Georgia, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama. Then the thought among DawgNation, I think, was that the ultimate proving ground for Georgia would be against an undefeated Alabama team. That'd be the spot where this was kind of all on the line, where this would kind of all go down. Well, now, and Mike Johnson, my partner in AT&T SEC Country Live, kind of referenced this to me off the other day, too, a little bit, that now I don't know that Georgia fans are looking as much forward to Alabama anymore. And that proving ground, that opportunity to knock off the team that's been the bull of the woods in the SEC. I think a lot of Georgia fans wouldn't mind getting a little rematch here with Auburn. I think a lot of Georgia fans wouldn't mind making Gus Malzahn regret what he said on the field on Saturday night. But Georgia's going to have to play a lot better for that to happen. Would be interesting to see the Dogs get the chance to do that, though. It's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up on today's program, including an update on UGA recruiting with Jeff Sintel right now. Hope you enjoy it.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we've got big news around UGA when it comes to UGA recruiting. I wanted to save this conversation, though, until Jeff Sintel joined us, because I think his insight on this is going to be top-notch, of course, as always. So Georgia does lose a defensive end, the four-star Caleb Tanner from the 2018 class, Jeff, and this obviously is going to strike a lot of folks as, well, that's a position where Georgia was already going to have a hard time figuring out how to fit all the guys in when you think about the possibility of a KJ Henry, who is not yet a UGA commit, but might be, Adam Anderson, Azeez Ojulari, who are UGA commits. I mean, how much is Georgia impacted by Tanner's decision to kind of go somewhere else, and how much was Tanner's decision maybe impacted by the number of guys who play a very similar position to him, who are either in or expect to be in or have a chance of being in Georgia's 2018 class?
Well, good morning, Brandon. Hey, man, that's a big topic, and I think from the jump I want to talk about Tanner in maybe the best possible light here. Number one is he is a very athletic outside linebacker type. He would have fit in nicely and maybe been one of the top linebackers in a lot of recruiting classes for Georgia in a lot of other years. Now, there are reports out there, and everybody's asking me about him to comment on things like academics and everything like that. Now, my belief here is a young man that is in the first semester of his senior year, and whatever grades issues he has a lot of time to work on it, especially once his football season is over. Not going to get into that. What I'm going to look into here is the big picture here. And the big picture here is, for whatever reason that Mr. Tanner made his decision, it helps to alleviate some things for Georgia with its 2018 recruiting class. And I kind of think it's something maybe my grandmother always used to say, God rest her soul, but she was like, robbing from Peter to pay Paul a little bit. And, to me, what's happening here is you just got to look at facts, Brandon. They have Adam Anderson and Azeez Ojulari, like you definitely stated earlier, committed for 2018. And both of those guys committed after Caleb Tanner did in July of 2017. Both of those guys are also higher-rated guys than Mr. Tanner in 2018 by quite a large margin. I think Tanner is probably the number. Last time I checked, he was number 308 or so, or 310 or so on the 24/7 Sports composite, and also the number 34 player in Georgia. So you've got Georgia, who's kind of recruited above him already in this class, with a lot of guys who do some of the same things. But the bigger picture is what we've been talking about on this program for a couple weeks now, and that is Georgia with 18 public commitments. That was with Tanner. How in the world were they going to slide in these new names like Alontae Taylor, like Cade Mays? And the other thing, you just got to look at it from a position standpoint. And Georgia was stacking up, especially when you think about the chances with KJ Henry, also higher rated. Adam Channing Tindall, also higher rated. Otis Reese, also higher rated. Reese and Tindall are kind of more flex linebackers, inside linebackers, and outside linebackers. But when you start considering, and then Javion Beckton out of Virginia Beach, Georgia was a little too top-heavy where they were looking at for that edge player at defensive end, outside linebacker, with everything they had on their wish list and everything that was already committed. To me, my big takeaway here is Caleb Tanner has moved on from Georgia, and what it does actually is it gives Georgia the ability to bring in even more top-tier talent going forward.
I'm seeing some pessimism in our comment section, Sean Schooler, others, about K.J. Henry, one of the names that comes up there, that they don't think he's coming to Georgia. I mean, what would you say to these UGA fans who are maybe hopeful that a Tanner decommitment opens up a spot from K.J. Henry, but other UGA fans who say, Henry's not going to Georgia, he's going to go somewhere else, maybe Clemson. What do you say to those Georgia fans who are striking a pessimistic tone about K.J. Henry in our comment section right now?
Well, I would say this. How many times has Kirby Smart and his staff surprised you already in the five-star lane? How many times has Georgia came out of nowhere with a prospect? I would also say, did you notice K.J. Henry's reactions and mood around several high-value Georgia commitments on when he made his official visit for the Mississippi State game? Now, those are all things to think about here, but I think the main thing here is it's not just K.J. Henry. Brandon, I know a lot of folks on Facebook saw our program last night, the Before the Hedges show with Hannah Chalker and some slightly under-the-weather correspondent. There's 14 names that I've kind of dialed in as those guys that could now fill the final 7 slots, the updated 7 slots for Georgia in 2018. And it's not just K.J. Henry. It's not just Otis Reese. It's not just Channing Tindall. You got Cade Mays, Alontae Taylor. I think Georgia takes 2 more defensive tackles, and that's likely a guy like Christian Barmore or Jordan Davis. There's Tyson Campbell to think about. There's a late visit from Isaac Taylor-Stewart. What's going to happen there with, players like, Trey Hill, Jamari Sawyer, Luke Ford. A lot of names, Brandon, not just K.J. Henry. I think if they're focusing just on K.J. Henry, they might be kind of maybe missing a total picture here, kind of one of those, not just looking at the hedges, but looking at all 100 yards at Stanford Stadium.
So you just said, I didn't mean to, I was not going to ask you about this, but I do want to follow up since you brought it up. You said Georgia's going to take 2 more defensive tackles. I think you mean in addition to Devontae Wyatt, I assume. Does that mean that one of those would be Cooper, hopefully, and if you're a Georgia fan, you would hope that, and then it'd either be Barmore or Davis? Is that kind of how that works, or could that be Barmore, Davis, no Cooper, plus Devontae Wyatt? I mean, what is the sort of slots for those 2 additional defensive tackles?
Well, you've got Rick Sandage, who's also, to me, we talked about him last week. I spoke to him last week. He's very much undecided. Everybody in the world thinks he's going to go to South Carolina. But to me, I just think the young man is still very clearly undecided. He might be undecided until February the 7th, and then he decides on South Carolina. You've also got to think about Tramel Waltho in the class as well. Georgia's got 2 commitments right now that will play the defensive tackle spot. One of them is Tramel Waltho out of Liberty County in Hinesville. That's Richard LeCount's hometown. You've also got Devontae Wyatt, who will come back in the fold as a junior college guy after just 1 semester and maintaining his B average for Georgia in 2018. He's going to be a mid-year. Now, the other names are Christian Barmore and I think Jordan Davis are the 2 names to think about right now. For some reason, Cooper has kind of cooled off on a lot of boards right now, and I don't even know if Cooper is really a take right now or being heavily recruited right now by Alabama of all places. So Cooper, last time I spoke to him, which was I think late last week, he told me that he was going to enroll later on this year. He was not going to think about enrolling early, and he would likely not sign early as well. So I did learn from 2 very good sources while I was in Auburn, Alabama, of all places. 2 parents of current Georgia commitments from the Philadelphia area said they believe that Christian Barmore will visit Georgia this weekend for the Kentucky game.
Okay.
And they also felt that at this time that Georgia was the top school for Christian Barmore. And as we discussed last night on Before the Hedges, I do think Georgia is in a very good spot right now with Jordan Davis as well. He's expected to be back in Athens again this weekend, 6'6", 325. And for everybody that was wondering about defensive line and defensive tackles, you're seeing a shift here. Maybe the Tanner news helps with that as well, because I do believe that Georgia, if they want to dominate the SEC and not just the SEC East going forward, they can never, ever ignore defensive line recruiting and offensive line recruiting. Yep. And you start thinking about a class that includes Wyatt, Walthor, potentially then Davis and Barmore or Cooper, and even Sandage should something happen late at the 11th hour with him. Georgia gets 3 to 4 defensive tackles in 2018. I bet a lot of fans out there will feel a lot better considering they did not sign a true defensive tackle in 2017.
That is so true. Let me go to the other side of the ball for a moment, and offensive lineman. And I read something that you wrote. It sounds like you were striking a similar tone yesterday to what I said on the video portion of DawgNation Daily about Trey Hill's comments about the Auburn victory over Georgia. For the people who may have missed it, Hill told one of our colleagues, Benjamin Wolk, something to the effect of Georgia had kind of gotten the big head about being number one, and Auburn beat them. He almost sounded excited about that Auburn victory. And what I said on our show yesterday, Jeff, at least in the video portion of the program, was not to read too much into that. I think a lot of times these young men are very guilty of kind of getting caught up in the emotion of the moment. And I believed that what Hill said about Auburn was not any kind of indicator about the direction that he was leaning, any more than, say, Aubrey Solomon wearing Georgia gear at an All-Star game was indication of him coming to Georgia, because ultimately he went to Michigan. That a lot of times in the recruiting game, there are more false positives than there are, true pieces of evidence. It seems like you kind of agree with that Hill being seemingly happy that Auburn won is not an indication that he's an Auburn lean, correct?
Correct. I would say pretty simply there that Trey Hill is a guy that's been prioritized by Georgia and Auburn for forever. He has been to Georgia numerous times, and he has worn a smile on almost every one of those occasions. And he's also been a recruit that's never shown cards, never, really named top 8s, top 12s, top 6s. I don't think he will even get down to a top 3. I think he will eventually just make his decision next month. He's been a guy, as I wrote and I've said, he's been a guy that's never shown cards. And I don't think that he is choosing to do so right now either.
So I want to shift gears here and talk about somebody that you also wrote about at DawgNation.com, and that's Rylan Goede, the 2019 tight end. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. I always feel like I'm maybe not, but I believe it's Rylan Goede is how you say his last name. And obviously there's a lot of like about him as a player, but just based on some of the conversations that you and I have had in the past about this young man, I feel like one of his potential values to Georgia is not just his stuff on the field, but the connection, the bond that he already has with other, Georgia players, either possible commits or current commits, like a Dominic Blaylock, his good friend wide receiver. I know he's good friends with J.D. Bertrand, the young man we spoke to at Marlowe's in Roswell last week. When you think about Goede potentially being a UGA commit, I mean, isn't that one of the things that he brings to the table is, the same way that the 2017 class had a strong bond with each other, the same with the 2018 class maybe forming that around Justin Fields. Doesn't Goede kind of give you some of that potential in 2019 as well, with Blaylock and maybe Bertrand and maybe some others who may be coming into the fold here pretty soon?
Yeah, Gode's a guy that, to me, is very, first of all, he's one of those rare human beings that I know a lot of guys out there will kind of just shake their head and wonder how this guy can shoot 76 or 77 on the golf course, and then he can hit the baseball about 450 feet, and then he can also shake a defender on a curl route or a stop route or something coming across the middle. Got a lot of athletic ability, especially in a 6'7", 235-pound frame. And I want to make something pretty clear here about Goede. Some people on the forums or some of our social avenues make these very flippant opinions about players like that. And I think I read something somewhere that detailed that tight end might not be a priority for Georgia in 2019. Just want to clearly state here why Gode's important. Besides being best friends with Dominic Blaylock and J.D. Bertrand, he's a guy that is a good, I want to say, a future team captain type guy, a good mixer, a good blender, just a guy that people get along with and they have a lot of respect for him. I've been really impressed with how Goede has always handled his recruitment. But you start looking at Georgia, and you look at Georgia, potentially they're going to lose 2 guys this year. They're going to lose another 2 guys next year, with potentially with a guy like Isaac Nada. Maybe Charlie Warner stays for 4 years, but Georgia needs to continue to add at least 1 tight end in 2019, no matter who they sign, if they take both John Fitzpatrick and Luke Ford in 2018. And Godey's a guy, he's noticed a lot of stuff about Georgia. I think maybe the best reason why I wanted to write about Godey was basically because he's a guy that I think will eventually come down to Auburn or Georgia. He was at the Auburn-Georgia game. I think Michigan will also be in there as well for him. These are my thoughts here. But I also feel that Godey's a guy that understands the warts right now for Georgia at the tight end position. He talked about those with Shane Beamer, how they were a lot of run calls. A lot of plays for the tight end in the South Carolina game that just somehow just got nipped in the bud by the flow of the game. He also was well aware that Georgia has a lot of times where it puts up 3 tight ends on the field. That's 10% of the time. Two tight ends on the field. That's 60% of the time. And have a tight end in about 98% of all their formations when they're playing a big-time opponent. I just think Ryland, also, great, like I said, a great baseball player. We've always kind of used baseball metaphors to describe his recruitment. I think maybe 5 months ago he said he was standing on second, and now he feels that he's right at third base. And to look for Ryland Godey to make his decision sometime around February. And should he choose Georgia, which is still his slight favorite, that's just more momentum. Nation's number 7 tight end for Georgia to try and stake a claim to the nation's top class in 2019.
Let me talk about another guy here real quick for a moment. That's Alontae Taylor. Now, you tell us all the time to follow the visits in terms of which players are interested in which schools and which schools are interested in those players, that visits can be a real clue here. I think there's also something that other fans can do, which is kind of follow the name checks, and Taylor's name has certainly been name-checked by you a lot in Centel Intel pieces recently at DawgNation.com. So now Butch Jones is gone from Tennessee. I believe that Taylor is now officially decommitted from that program. How real is it between Taylor and Georgia right now? And I guess I still also don't understand, is he more of a receiver? Is he more of a defensive back? Maybe that doesn't really matter at this point, but how real is the possibility of Alontae Taylor to Georgia at the moment?
I think he's one of those players that could fit a lot of holes, and I think that's what Georgia's looking for, with space as a premium on the couch for 2018, so to speak. Alontae Taylor's a guy that would be an explosive receiver. He could also play some, safety or cornerback, and those are clear needs for Georgia in this class. I think it's clear needs for Georgia in the program, considering that, especially at receiver, they didn't have a lot of playmaking ability, a lot of guys that could get away from press coverage, and also a lot of guys that could continually catch the football in tight windows, aside from Javon Wims, of course. I just think he's a guy that would fit a lot of roles for Georgia. He told me after he decommitted from Tennessee that he can't freaking wait to take his official visit to Georgia this weekend. He's good boys with Justin Fields. A lot of name dropping going on there with Alontae Taylor. He likes Georgia a lot, and I think this weekend will be a crucial visit for Georgia for potentially adding Alontae to the class.
Oh, wow, that's a really interesting foreshadow of what's going to happen on Saturday. I know you're a little under the weather, and I appreciate you sticking with us here today on DawgNation Daily. Let me squeeze in one final question before we let you go here. You touched on before, and I thought the way you said it was so appropriate. Just a few minutes ago, you said, hey, you never want to take, a year off recruiting those line of scrimmage guys, those defensive linemen, those offensive linemen. You can't miss on those guys in any recruiting class. Otherwise, you put yourself in a bind. And for me, Jeff, and you and I were both in Auburn on Saturday. We did the Dixie Vodka postgame show after the game. Isn't that what the Auburn game kind of proved? That even with Georgia having had success here in recent years, certainly last year on the offensive line, maybe before that on the defensive line, but Georgia still missed out on a Dontavius Russell, still missed out on a Derek Brown. Still needs more offensive linemen even after the big haul in 2017. Isn't that what the Auburn game proved more than anything else? That what you do, your job to cover recruiting every day. This is the reason why we stay so plugged in on that subject, because you've got to have game-breaking players at every single one of those defensive and offensive line spots if you want to make sure that what happened against Auburn doesn't happen again in the future, right?
I think that's clear. And, for everybody that had kind of pointed to, we see this on our DawgNation forum a lot, and hopefully everybody is hanging out there a lot right now. But we see this on our forum a lot. Got some really great posters, a lot of really smart football guys on there. But everybody was always speculating, okay, what happens with Trey Hill? What happens with Acade Mays? What happens with Jamari Sawyer? And people were sitting there going, well, I don't know if anybody can kind of parachute in and start right away like Andrew Thomas did, because they were just kind of, I guess, fueled by the context of how well the line had played this year. I thought that Auburn game, and folks, I hope everybody just realizes that for what it is. That was a big-time SEC football game. It was against the top 10 opponent, who I think probably will be favored against Alabama in the Iron Bowl, against a top 10 opponent on the road. And it just showed that Georgia had a lot of guys, in my opinion, maybe playing above their abilities, playing above their star rankings, and doing a great job for Georgia so far in 2017. But then when they got matched up with elite talent like a Russell, like a Holland, like a Derek Brown, you see reasons why Georgia still wants to continually update and upgrade its offensive line. Said this a lot. I'm going to say it probably 19 more times by the time next September rolls around. I think Jamari Sawyer is the most important player in this class as far as right away coming in and stabilizing a position where Georgia still needs some all-SEC future NFL talent. I still think he comes in, should he choose Georgia, and plays right away and gets on the field right away. And the more Jamari Sawyers, the more Trey Hills, the more Cade Mays that come into the program, you really change the offensive line room for Georgia. And sure, it's going to take a while. I think maybe one of the biggest telltales of this season was that you saw guys like Notori Johnson, Isaiah Wilson. Those were some of the highly rated guys, and they weren't getting on the field fast. But maybe a technician, a guy that knows how to play smart football like a Justin Schaefer, was getting in the too deep for Georgia and was playing in some of those blowouts and preparing for the future. I just think offensive line is a very tough position to evaluate and project, but I feel comfortable doing it with a guy like Sawyer because he's smart, he's tough, and he is strong. Three things that really, to me, that's the gateway to somebody playing right away. That's knowing the position well, being a physical man at your position, and also being very strong. Because you're gonna go in combat, Brandon, and that's the word. You're gonna go into combat when you're 18, 19 years old against a lot of guys that are 21 and 22 years old. And whether you want to call it a wrestling match or whether you want to call it any sort of mano-a-mano, arm wrestling, any sort of physical contest, a lot of times that 20, 21-year-old guy, guys like Derek Brown, guys like Jeffrey Holland, are going to beat up that 18-year-old kid, that 18-year-old young man, because they've been in the film room, they've been in the position groups, and they've been in the weight room at a huge SEC strength and conditioning program for 2 or 3 years, and that is just a huge gap to overcome, even if you're a freshman. So that's what means you really need to recruit those really special offensive line talent to have a chance in those big SEC games.
Certainly you're playing hurt a little bit today. You got a little bit of a cold going on there. You found a homespun remedy. Anything work for you, Jeff? You got any kind of honey or anything like that make you feel better here?
Man, I tell you what, when it rains, it pours. My young daughter actually had pink eye today from the school, so I had to go find a way this morning to get her and get some eye drops in her eyes as well. I know it's not a glamorous life of an intrepid recruiting reporter, but sometimes, man, you just got to play hurt. You got to, put your nose down, and you got to do what needs to be done.
You do it with the best of them, Jeff. Thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily today.
All right, guys. Be well.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, listen to me. Jeff said it so perfect. You think that this is a guy that's just sort of traveling around from football game to football game, talking to every big-time recruit, doing all that kind of stuff. But behind the scenes, it's eye drops in kids' eyes. It's getting over being sick. It's a lot of that from Jeff Sintel, but it's always good to have him here on DawgNation Daily. And as we transition, get ready to do our SEC Through, I will say, one of the most interesting things that Jeff said right there, and there was a lot with Jeff, on Caleb Tanner, on what the Auburn game proved, and everything in between, Alontae Taylor. But did you hear Jeff kind of softening his stance a bit on Robert Cooper? Now, I will be honest with you, I am very predictable on stuff like this. I will always take the bait on guys like Cooper for a few reasons. Highest-rated defensive tackle in the state of Georgia. Big guy, 360 pounds. Florida State commit. You think about a big major program. So flipping a guy from Florida State gets me excited. A very highly rated 4-star gets me excited, especially at a position this year where there aren't a lot of 4- and 5-star guys around the country. I don't believe there are any 5-star defensive tackles. At least there weren't the last time I looked at 2018 rankings. And just the sheer size. I mean, Cooper checks a lot of boxes for me. I'm obviously not scouting his game film or anything like that, so I can't evaluate him as a prospect. But the criteria that I just sort of rattled off, one of the reasons why I was excited about Cooper. But it sounds like Jeff at least based on that conversation, softening his stance a little bit. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about going forward. I'll also tell you here very quickly that DawgNation Daily is brought to you in part today by my friends at Georgia United Credit Union and their all-new unified checking account, which gives you the comforts of a free checking account and the options to earn more. It's a simple, convenient, and rewarding checking account that fits your lifestyle. Visit GUCU.org for the terms and conditions that apply to this account, federally insured by NCUA. All right, so the Chip Kelly rumors to Florida really starting to heat up here a little bit. I'm not quite sure what to make about this. I don't remember if I said this on our program yesterday. I know that I said this on AT&T SEC Country Live. I feel like these Kelly rumors right now, as such they exist, I feel like they're coming from Florida. And I don't have any kind of insight on that myself. This is just a guess. This is just my own rumor about rumors. But, you know, this notion that, Pete Thamel had this at Yahoo Sports. Another guy that's sort of connected to the agent world kind of had, Florida's negotiating with Chip Kelly. They're vetting Chip Kelly. It feels to me like something that Florida has started to kind of move some other coaching candidates off a spot and to either get some hurry up here with Dan Mullen or Scott Frost or someone like that. I don't really believe Florida's going to hire Chip Kelly. I don't. And if Florida did hire Chip Kelly, I actually think that'd be good news for Georgia. And I'd love to have you weigh in on this. If you want to put it in the comment section here, or if you're watching a Facebook Live, or if you want to hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I don't think Georgia fans should be fearful of Chip Kelly to Florida. Even though Kelly went to a national championship game in Oregon, and even though Kelly is pretty clearly an offensive genius, I don't think there's much to deny that. I don't think Kelly to Florida is that big of a problem for UGA. I've said before, the thing that would scare me about Florida if I was Georgia would be Florida hiring some sort of top-notch, first-rate recruiter that was going to close the border and make it impossible for Georgia to kind of go down and get a Tyson Campbell or go down and get, the next generation of Sony Michel. That would be what would sort of scare you off of the Florida situation if they brought in a big-time recruiter. I don't think Chip Kelly's that. And for a guy like Jim McElwain, who was probably fired in part for being just a little bit weird, I mean, if you listen to Chip Kelly talk before, have you heard what people who have worked with him at Philadelphia or San Francisco have said about Kelly? He's just a little bit weird. And it's one thing to kind of hide behind the Nike logo at Oregon. No one really cares how weird you are. Plus, it's the Pacific Northwest. Everybody's sort of weird out there. Down here in the South, there's a certain kind of way you have to be. And I don't know that Chip Kelly is necessarily that way. I think that Kelly to Florida would actually be good news for Georgia. A little different scenario in Tennessee, though. Dennis Dodd is suggesting in a column at CBS Sports that the time is right for Dan Mullen to leave Mississippi State. And there are, of course, all kinds of rumors out there that if he did leave, the place he'd want to go is not Florida, but it might be Tennessee. And supposedly Tennessee is open to Dan Mullen. Now, that's not a news report from me. That's just a sort of a compilation of all the rumors that have kind of been out there as of late. I think that Dan Mullen to Tennessee is potentially a pretty interesting hire for the Vols. Now, I don't think that Mullen is going to do great recruiting work at Tennessee. I think that, he's won some battles at Mississippi State. A lot of what he's done from a roster standpoint there has been kind of built around junior college guys and things like that. But I think that Mullen may be the right sort of fit for the Vols in that there's only so much great recruiting you're going to be able to do at the University of Tennessee right now. There are not a lot of elite players in that state. They have to come into Georgia to get guys, but so is Clemson, so is South Carolina. There's a lot of programs trying to get into Georgia to get players. Tennessee sort of has to get in line with them. It's almost like you want a guy like Mullen who, has shown he can develop quarterbacks. He's made Nick Fitzgerald into a good guy. He made Dak Prescott into a good quarterback before that. Mullen may be one of those guys that is capable of doing a little more with a little less, and I think Tennessee going forward is going to have a little less than Georgia and probably Florida is going to have from a talent standpoint. So I think Mullen to Tennessee is potentially a much bigger problem for Georgia than Chip Kelly to Florida, even though that Florida's the better overall program than Tennessee. I think that I would pay more respect to Mullen, what he might be able to do in Knoxville, than I would Chip Kelly in Gainesville, but you can kind of weigh in and tell me what you think on that. One more quick SEC story that I want to get to, and then I want to go back to Georgia here for a moment. 538.com apparently gives Auburn a 90% chance of making the college football playoff if it were to win out. Highest chance of any of the two lost teams, even more so than Ohio State. Now, we'll talk about this on Academy Sports and Outdoors Path to the Playoff tonight on the SEC Country Facebook page. But I told you last week I didn't think Ohio State was out of the playoff conversation, and I think that's even more true this week. I think Auburn probably would make the playoff if they were a two-loss team that wins out the rest of the way, but I probably don't need 538 to tell me that. What it shows you, at least for the moment, is that Auburn's win against Georgia was a big one for that program on Saturday. They need another big one against Alabama to close out the regular season. And to just sort of restate what I said a little earlier in the show, I think a lot of Georgia fans are kind of hoping they get it, but I think a lot of Georgia fans were hoping for the chance to sort of end the Auburn season and send Auburn out on a bad note after Auburn made a bit of a name for itself after what it did to Georgia last week. We'll have to see how that plays out. There's a lot of football between now and then. But I think there are a lot of Georgia fans who are kind of hoping for that opportunity right now. Will make that your SEC through. Of course, though, for Georgia to get a chance to do something like that, to win the SEC championship either against Auburn or Alabama, the two teams that it's either going to play in December, frankly, Georgia's just going to have to play a lot better than it did on Saturday against Auburn. Now, we know that the real story of the game was the dominance on both lines of scrimmage for the Tigers. We talked to Jeff Sindel about this a moment ago. But ESPN is kind of sounding a different alarm for Georgia about where it stands here moving to the rest of the season. And for the most part, I've kind of pushed back against criticism of Jake Fromm. I've been a Fromm defender here over the last few weeks. I'm going to continue to be that way. I think Fromm's had a sensational freshman season. But there is a stat that ESPN gives us here that I do think is worth us paying attention to at least a little bit. Let me read something that Mark Schlabach wrote at ESPN.com on Monday. And the topic of the column was the one potential fatal flaw for all the remaining playoff contenders. And for Georgia, what Schlabach notes is the potential fatal flaw is a one-dimensional offense, an offense that's only capable of running, that's not capable of throwing the football. Let me get to the point that I want to read here. So here's the little paragraph from Schlabach that I do think highlights a pretty important number. Schlabach writes, given Georgia's production on the ground before Auburn, the Bulldogs hadn't asked true freshman quarterback Jake Fromm for too much. Entering this week, only 40% of Georgia's total yards have come via the pass, 12th lowest rate in the FBS according to ESPN Stats and Info. Here's what he goes on to say, though. This is Mark Schlabach from ESPN.com. That's not a good sign. No team, Schlabach says, has won a national championship with that little of its yardage coming on passes since Nebraska in 1997 at 24%. So that's a number that I think is worth paying attention to. That Georgia, were to go on and win a national championship, would be doing so with a ratio very different than most teams that have won the national title. Now, I'm going to stop short of saying that's a reason for panic, that's a reason for alarm, because what the Schlabach stat, while true, does not fully take into account a couple of Alabama teams that would have been close to a national championships. The 2014 team, which lost to Ohio State in the college football playoff. The 2016 team that lost, obviously, to a Clemson, the national championship game. They may have thrown the football for a little more than Georgia has this year, but these were still teams that were heavily imbalanced in favor of the pass over the run. So it's important to note that Georgia's passing game is not keeping pace right now with previous national champions, but not that far off the formula that Alabama's used to win the last 3 SEC championships. All right, let's wrap up the show here today on this Tuesday. As we said, we're in a lot better mood today than we were on Monday, and that's going to continue for the rest of the week. Georgia's still got a lot to play for, and Georgia's got a lot of evidence to suggest that it's going to play much better. And we'll also think about our Gator Header countdown here. 347 days from right now, Georgia gets ready to head to Jacksonville, beat Florida again. If it's Chip Kelly, bring him on. I think Kelly's time at Gainesville will be 3 or 4 years and no more than that. I think Kirby Smart will put him on the unemployment line in about that many years. I just don't think that he's a fit for the SEC, an offensive genius, but I think that Kirby Smart will do just fine against Chip Kelly if this is truly the way that it goes. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I don't think Florida's going to hire Chip Kelly for that job. But that's an issue for 347 days for right now. For now, though, I will remind you one more time, retweet one of my tweets from @DawgNation Daily, either the link to the video show before the show at 10 a.m. or the audio version after it's posted sometime around 12 p.m. I'll draw another winner for an Only East t-shirt tomorrow, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you checking in on video, we got some time for some more comments right now. We'll give you a chance to participate in that. Appreciate your thoughts on UGA football. Let me start with Jeffrey Tucker here, who says, My issue with the Auburn game was nothing new with UGA. We break down and fall in big games. And I know that that's been kind of said a lot, Kenneth, or I should say Jeffrey, that this was another example of, I think Clay Travis says Georgia's going to Georgia. This was Georgia-ing. This was, some sort of example of that. And obviously I don't have all the evidence I need to refute that point because, I've lived through a lot of those bad losses myself. But right now it's just Georgia fans talking, right? There's no Auburn fan probably watching this at the moment. There may be a few, straggler trolls in the comment section. But for the most part, this is mostly just Georgia people here on this conversation. Just between us. Wouldn't you say that this is a different team than that? Even if the result on Saturday felt like, some of the stuff that happened in 2014 or the Alabama game in 2015, or even if it felt like some of that. Don't you have some confidence in what you think you know, what you think you've seen about this team? This team and this program now are going to be different, and maybe that's just wishful thinking. Maybe that's just hoping. Maybe it is. But, I said before the game to somebody at a tailgate on Saturday, it may have been to my brother, that I was nervous about the game against Auburn. I told you that on Friday. But I'd never seen this was the best Georgia team I'd ever been nervous about. That I think that Georgia just has a lot going for it. An opponent that you respect in Auburn, game didn't turn out the way it was supposed to, the way you wanted it to. But this is still a Georgia team I think that has a lot going for it. So, yes, this result on Saturday felt very similar to previous Georgia results. And if there's another one in the SEC championship game, then you know what? You do have a right for now to say same old Georgia. I just think that this Georgia team this year has given us enough reason because it has been blowing doors on the other teams in the SEC. It's just been walloping those teams. And you can say they're weak opponents, but the truth is a lot of previous Georgia teams were not beating up on weak opponents. I think there's some evidence to suggest that this is not the same old Georgia, but obviously the end results for the rest of the season will go a long way in determining that. Anthony Prophet says, what has happened to our tight ends? Does it seem like they have just gone quiet? So, yeah, tight ends haven't been a big part of the Georgia offense, and that's a disappointment because of the talent I think that Georgia has there. Charlie Warner does get a catch in the first drive on Saturday. Nada was targeted at least once. Auburn had good coverage over it, though, on the one pass play that I'm thinking about that was intended for Nada. There may have been others. That's just the one that comes to mind. But for the most part, Nada and Warner just have not been involved enough in the Georgia offense. I don't quite know what to make about that. Is that a freshman quarterback who is only limited in where he can throw the football, and right now the tight end is just not a progression that he's getting to? There's a chance that's true, at least partially true. But, it's also worth pointing out that, Alabama had a five-star tight end, O.J. Howard, for the last 4 years, and Howard didn't have a very good career at Alabama either. He had a big national championship game in after the 2015 season, had another big one last year in the 2016 season. But those two national championship games were the outliers for Howard in his career. For the most part, Alabama didn't use Howard very much either. Maybe we are in an era where it's just sort of hard to use tight ends in the college game for whatever reason, maybe X's and O's reasons that I can't quite comprehend. But Georgia is not the only team that has trouble getting tight ends the football. Now, you can say Alabama has so many weapons that they just don't get to the tight end. That may be true as opposed to Georgia, which needs more offensive weapons and can't seem to utilize the tight ends appropriately. It's a fair question to ask. Georgia seemingly would be better if the tight ends were more involved. I'm just not quite sure I understand exactly what the reasoning is. K. Tanner Barfield says, it was just a bad day. The whole game can't just be blamed on the idea that Auburn is just that much better than every team we've played this year. We had a bad day. It happens. Kirby has shown his ability to quickly adjust this year. Let's get hyped up for Kentucky. Agree with you on all those fronts. And I think one of the things that makes the Auburn game frustrating is that, you can take away one aspect of what Georgia does, good work along the line of scrimmage, and the whole house of cards just sort of tumbles there at that point in time. And that's what I think is going on. And it's like the commenter just said. It's not, I think, that Auburn's so much better than Georgia, but I think that Georgia is a threat to collapse in any game if you take away its dominance along the line of scrimmage. And Auburn was able to do that on Saturday because, Auburn is one of the few teams that Georgia's played this season that's recruited as well as Georgia has. And, Kirby Smart's taking Georgia to a different, plane moving forward, number 3 class for 2017, maybe a top 3 class for 2018. But before 2017, Georgia and Auburn for the last half decade at least were very, very similar in recruiting. It's one of the reasons why we had so much confidence about the Florida game this season. Go back to a year ago when the Gator Hater countdown started. One of the things I said at the time was that I believed that the Florida-Georgia rivalry, or the Georgia-Florida rivalry, was going to change, was going to evolve. And one of the reasons I felt that way was because of the failures of Florida in its 2015, 2016 recruiting classes. Jim McElwain was not bringing in talent. So it's easy to flip that rivalry because Georgia was bringing in better players. Rick was bringing in better players than McElwain. Kirby Smart in his first year was bringing in better players than McElwain. It's easy to do that. It's easy to beat Tennessee 41-0 because Tennessee had kind of fallen off the pace of keeping up with what Georgia was doing from a talent perspective. But Auburn was kind of right there with Georgia. Georgia's, I think, average ranking over the last 5 years may be around 5th. Auburn's was about 8th. Now, you can say that's a little bit of a nod in favor of Georgia, but not enough to make that big of a difference. It's not the significant advantage that Georgia owns against Tennessee and Florida. And so, therefore, the wrong thing happens. All of a sudden, the other guy's got enough talent to beat you. There are just not a lot of teams that Georgia plays that have the same talent level that it does. For right now, Auburn's still one of those. And it's why we pay so much attention to recruiting here on DawgNation Daily, that in the 2018 class, the 2019 class, Georgia puts some distance between itself and Auburn. And if it does, you'll see that show up on the field. Now, obviously, you'll make reference to the fact that even with similar talent, Georgia's been beating Auburn a lot as of late. But as proud as I am to say that Georgia had that streak against Auburn, that was the kind of outlier that was, I hate to say this, but bound to correct itself at some point because the talent difference between Georgia and Auburn just wasn't great enough that one team ought to have won 9 of the last 11. That's just a fact, I believe. Jose Longway says we got to blow Kentucky out and blow out Georgia Tech. I was thinking about that a little bit. Kentucky went down to the wire last year. It'd be kind of an interesting way to show how much Georgia's grown this year to kind of get an easy win against the Wildcats on Saturday. But the other thing is, we've kind of noticed some parallels this year. We may talk about this leading up to the week of that game against Georgia Tech, but there are some parallels between Kirby Smart's second season at Georgia, Mark Richt's second season at Georgia, Kirby Smart's second season at Georgia, Nick Saban's second season at Alabama, Richt, obviously Kirby's predecessor here, Saban, his old boss at Alabama. Well, think about what both those guys did in their second year. At Alabama, Nick Saban beat Auburn, I believe, 36-0 in his second season of 2008. That's the in-state rival to close out the season. Remember Mark Richt's second game against his in-state rival, Georgia Tech, in 2002? That was 50-something to 7. Was it 52-7, something like that? That both those coaches, Smart's old boss at Alabama, Smart's predecessor at Georgia, got blowout wins against in-state rivals to close out seasons in their second year. Could Kirby Smart match that against Georgia Tech here in a couple weeks? That would be kind of an interesting thing to see. Gary and Christian Gulisano says a missed touchdown catch, missed flea flicker, potential touchdown, and a missed field goal in the first half. That's 16-24 at the half, and we are having a different conversation. So basically talking about some missed opportunities against Auburn and how that could have made the game different, and it's true. At a certain point in time, I do think it's inappropriate for this Georgia team to get blown out because there is just too much talent, and there is a real head-scratching thing of, I get losing, but how'd you get blown out? We may talk about that some on SEC Country Live today. How do you get blown out when you've got as much as what Georgia's got going for it? So that's a fair question to bring up. But what Gary and Christian there also talk about is that, there are a couple plays that could have gone different. All of a sudden, this is a much closer game. And I think that's going to happen from time to time in college football. I do think that's a fair point. Ali Travers says, Travers, hope I pronounced that correct. Do you think Clemson deserves to be in the top 4 if it ends up that way tonight and knocks us out? Oklahoma, for that matter, we'd all have one loss. I think that's a really good point. And this is one of the things I think is maddening about the committee. So the committee is going to punish Georgia tonight for losing badly to Auburn, right? But the 40 points that Georgia gave up to Auburn, how much worse is that than Oklahoma, who gave up 1 million points to Oklahoma State? Now, Oklahoma still won, and Oklahoma State's top 10 team, But, I mean, if we're going to punish Georgia for giving up 40 points, I mean, didn't Oklahoma give up that many to Oklahoma State? So that seems to be a little bit of an unfair thing. Or if not unfair, at least illogical. And, you're going to say, well, Georgia had a bad loss. It lost at Auburn. For goodness sakes, Clemson lost at Syracuse. Now, the good news is this is all going to work itself out because if Georgia wins the SEC championship and wins all its remaining games, it's going to the college football playoff. But what Ali's pointing out, or maybe it's Ali, I hope if I messed up the name, I apologize. But what the commenter is pointing out is that there is a certain lack of logic in how the committee goes about its business. And it's one of the reasons why I like the debate, but the debate's also maddening because everyone acts like it's a foregone conclusion. Well, of course Clemson and Oklahoma ought to be ranked ahead of Georgia. Of course that should happen. But the truth is their resumes aren't really all that much better than the Dawgs is. Jeffrey Tucker says Oklahoma still won, though, and that is true. Tram Dickerson L says we're going to lose to Kentucky also if we don't move on from last week. So, Tram, I take Kirby Smart at his word. By the way, it is late. We got to go here. I take Kirby Smart at his word when he says the team has moved on. I think they've absolutely done that. I trust him when he says that. Let me take two more quick comments. We'll get out of here. Trey Railford says, remember 2012 after South Carolina, all was lost. Then obviously Georgia won all the rest of its games. That's an important point to bring up. Darian Daniel says, don't have to be number one to be invited to the party. Just win, baby. Darian, good point. Daniel Goldsmith says, don't look at the polls until after the SEC championship game. So obviously the only one that matters is the one that comes after that. But listen, I'm a college football fan. I can't help myself. I do enjoy the debate, and the debate in some form or fashion will be ongoing again after tonight. Don't forget, it's a late announcement tonight. There's college basketball. The thing doesn't come on until like 9 p.m. tonight. We'll actually be on the SEC Country Facebook page for our Academy Sports and Outdoors Path to the Playoff late tonight for that. So I hope you'll check that out. Thanks for being with us today on DawgNation Daily. We'll post the audio version at DawgNation.com and on iTunes here in just a moment. We will have AT&T SEC Country Live coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern Time today on the SEC Country Facebook page. And then I will see you again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live. Y'all have a great day.